Ndị be anyị kenekwenụ m unu. Anyị si ka nke onye chiri ya zerụkwa. Anyị si n'ụbọchị nke taa dịrị na anyị na mma, na ihe ya dịka echi na echi ada agwụ agwụ, otu anyị kwuru otu akọ ya dịrịrị. Ise ise dịka o si dị, ihe a bụ Eastern News 24 ka anyị si na-ewetara ya bụ ozi ọnụ ụjọ gị na ugbu a n'iru akwụkwọ gbasịta maka ya bụ ife unu na anụ na-eme n'obodo anyị nọ n'ime ya, anụ gburu onwe a na-azụ n'ala Igbo. Ya bụ ife ka na-ewetara na Eastern News 24 ya wetara n'iru akwụkwọ bụ n'ụbọchị nke taa bụ according to one of the Biafran activists, and he quotes, Nigerian government in the panic rejects as UN ECOWAS order Mazi Nnamdi Kanu's release in court as his victory echoes. Hear the news in details. Alright, according to Yabo, one night wetara Yabo zi n'iru akwụkwọ n'ụbọchị ụbọchị nke taa ya masị m na ịtọ ntị na gị ya bụ ife oji maka ya wee bịa ọzọ dị ka ịbịa bụtụsa ya bụ ozi na nwere ife ilu zuru na ịtụsa ya bụ ozi ka o rute ụmụnna anyị ndị ọzọ n'ebe dị iche iche aka maka asịrị ọ nụrụ ya mee gịnị ya kọrọ nwanne ya. Alright, over to you, sir.
So guys, let me say it here that if Justice James Omotosho finally it declares and rules in favor of Nnamdi Kanu and orders for his release, I am not sure that the federal government will actually listen to him and release Mazi Nnamdi Kanu. Now I'm going to prove to you, a lot of people do not even know that the United Nations and the ECOWAS court has actually ruled in favor of Nnamdi Kanu, ordering and telling the FG to release him unconditionally. But the federal government led by both Tinubu and Muhammad Buhari refused and said that they will never release him. Now I'm going to show you what the United Nations said and what the ECOWAS court ordered and told the federal government to do immediately, but they actually refused to do that. So this particular case, is becoming so dangerous and so tricky that a court will give order, the federal government will say we will never obey this particular order. Imagine the UN, the United Nations and ECOWAS court gave order, and the federal government said it's a lie that they are not going to obey it, even when the appeal court gave order that Nnamdi Kanu should actually be released unconditionally. The federal government refused to do that. So what is now the guarantee that if James Omotosho gives his final ruling in favor of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, that the federal government will actually obey or probably listen to this particular case? Meanwhile, let me show you what the UN told the federal government and what the ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States Court, told the federal government to do when Nnamdi Kanu was arrested. Let us start with the UN this thing, as you can see on the screen. So they said, yes, the United Nations, being the UN, has previously called for the release of Nnamdi Kanu, specifically in July 2022. That the UN Human Rights Council Working Group on Arbitrary Detention issued an opinion with the number 25/2022 declaring that Kanu's detention by the Nigerian government to be arbitrary and unlawful. They said that the UN body demanded his immediate and unconditional release, citing violations of international human rights due to his extraordinary rendition from Kenya in June 2021 and subsequent detention. Now look at what they recommended. These are the key details of the UN opinion and what they recommended and gave to the federal government. They said this is the basis for the demand that the UN made when they asked the federal government to release Nnamdi Kanu. Said that the UN working group found that Kanu's arrest and extradition lacked a legal basis, violating Article 9 and 14 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which protect against arbitrary detention and ensure fair trial rights. The group noted that his rendition from Kenya was extrajudicial, as no extradition treaty was followed and Kenya denied involvement. Kenyan government has actually kept on denying the involvement. That means it is quite illegal, which even the Supreme Court of the Federal Republic of Nigeria ruled itself that the extraordinary rendition of Nnamdi Kanu from Kenya went against international laws and principles. So even with that particular foundation and basis, there shouldn't be any trial. But let's go ahead with what these are the key details of the UN opinion. And these are the recommendations the UN called for. Number one, look at the recommendations that the United Nations actually called for or gave. They said the UN called for, number one, Kanu's immediate release. Number two, compensation and reparations for the violation of his rights. Not just his release, that the federal government should equally pay him some certain level of compensations and reparations for violating some of his rights and fundamental and human rights. The third recommendation that this UN gave was an investigation into the circumstances of his rendition and detention, so that they will know which people to be punished and all that, because it went against international laws. Until now, everybody is denying that they are not involved in the extraordinary rendition. The fourth recommendation they gave to the federal government said that Nigeria to report back within 6 months on compliance by January 2023. They told the Nigerian government to report and report back within 6 months on compliance. Till date, the Nigerian government, led by both Buhari and Bola Tinubu, has not responded or probably replied or probably complied to these particular recommendations and order that was given by the United Nations. And it is a very scary system. It's a very scary system. This is just for the UN. I'm going to tell you what the ECOWAS court, the Economic Community of West African States, being the West African court, gave orders and equally told the federal government the same thing. I'm going to show you the separate decision that ECOWAS gave too. But it is very shocking and it is very disturbing when the federal government of a country refuses to obey court orders. It is very, 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 very shocking that even when the appeal court of the Federal Republic of Nigeria quashed Nnamdi Kanu's case and ordered for his immediate release from DSS dungeon and all that, the federal government refused to do so. It is very dangerous. Even if you want to file any case, why not obey the first court orders that are pre-existing first? That is the most important thing before you can follow any other way. The first thing is you return him back to Kenya and probably start your extradition process if you want to extradite him before any other thing. The right things must be done before the prosecution can proceed, which is basically the truth. You can't build something on nothing, because the trial is being tried on nothing. Since every court has actually ruled that your extraordinary rendition from Kenya makes no sense. So what is the essence of trying him when you are building on nothing? You are building on a faulty foundation. Everything will collapse. That is basically the truth. Meanwhile, let me show you what the ECOWAS court equally said. So this is the ECOWAS court ruling. In a related development, the ECOWAS court in July 2022, in the same year, barred the Nigerian government from prosecuting Kanu until his rendition case was resolved, reinforcing the UN stance. However, Nigeria has disregarded this particular ruling again. This is ECOWAS, so that Nigeria as a country belongs to. Let's read in proper context for us to see what the ECOWAS ruling was all about. Now, they said that the ECOWAS ruling of July 2022, this is the case background, what happened and why ECOWAS gave the ruling. Now, Nnamdi Kanu, through his legal team, filed a suit against the federal government at the ECOWAS court when this entire issue started, challenging his extraordinary rendition from Kenya in June 2021 and his subsequent detention. The suit alleged violations of his fundamental rights under the African Charter on Human and People's Rights and other international instruments. Now, they said these are the key findings. After Nnamdi Kanu's lawyer, filed a case at the ECOWAS court against the federal government. Now, the case went back and forth and all that, and the ECOWAS court came out and gave their judgment and gave their final ruling and their key findings. Now, look at the key findings of the ECOWAS court and not the key findings of any other. This is ECOWAS court, one of the most prestigious courts we have in Africa. These are the key findings. Number one, look at what the ECOWAS court finds. It said the court ruled that Kanu's rendition from Kenya to Nigeria was unlawful. Like I said, nobody works with sentiments in courts. If you carry this case to anywhere, they will still rule the same thing. If the Supreme Court has ruled the same thing, that his extraordinary rendition is unlawful, that means you cannot, like I said earlier, build something on nothing. So they said the court ruled that Kanu's rendition from Kenya to Nigeria was unlawful as it violated international law due to the absence of a legal extradition process. Kenya's failure to provide evidence of lawful extradition was a critical factor. That's what I'm saying. That you cannot try a man that you extradited in a wrongful manner. So let's go ahead. So this is one of the key findings that the ECOWAS court made. The second key finding, they said that the FG, mean the federal government's actions, including the invasion of Kanu's home in 2017, and his abduction in 2021 were deemed violations of his right to personal liberty and dignity under Article 5 and 6 of the African Charter. The ECOWAS court itself ruled again that the federal government's action when they invaded Kanu's home in 2017 and his abduction in 2021, that these were deemed violations of his rights, of his human rights to personal liberty and dignity under the Article 5 and 6 of the African Charter. So the ECOWAS court said, you people violated this man's rights by invading his home and by even arresting or probably, kidnapping him all the way from Kenya to Nigeria. So every court is still reiterating the same thing. Every international court is still reiterating the same thing. UN, the same thing. ECOWAS, the same thing. Now look at the third thing the ECOWAS court, found in their key findings. They said, and in their ruling, they said the court found Nigeria liable for arbitrary detention and inhumane treatment. The court itself, the ECOWAS court, this is not a Nigerian court too. This is not a court probably in the Igbo land or any place to talk about maybe bias and sentiment. This is ECOWAS court that oversees the the countries we have in the West African part of this continent. They said the court found Nigeria liable for arbitrary detention and inhumane treatment. So, like I said, there is no court that works with emotions. Facts on ground, that is what the courts, work with. If you can't present enough proof to your claims and all that, the court will rule against you. No sentiments. Like I've often said it here, whether you are Nnamdi Kanu supporter or Tinubu or for the federal government or you're against him, remove sentiments and bias whenever we are analyzing this case. And, even if you are unintelligent, follow through to understand what is actually happening. Now look at what the court ordered. These are the orders that we are issued after they made the key findings. Now the ECOWAS court now gave this order. They said the ECOWAS court barred the federal government. Look at what the orders. These are the complete orders from the ECOWAS court. Now the ECOWAS court barred the federal government from continuing Kanu's prosecution on terrorism and treasonable felony charges until the issue of his unlawful rendition was resolved. This effectively implied that his detention for those charges was unjustified pending further legal clarity. Like I said before, what the ECOWAS court barred the FG, being the federal government, whether Tinubu or Buhari or anybody, from actually continuing with Kanu's prosecution on terrorism and or treasonable felony. The court said, until you people resolve the issue of his unlawful extradition from Kenya, that you people are barred from actually trying Nnamdi Kanu or continuing his trial at the Federal High Court or anywhere in the country. Now look at the second order that they issued, that the court ordered Nigeria to pay Kanu $3,100 in legal costs as compensation for the violations. They even awarded a compensation that the federal government must pay Kanu, as a matter of fact, $3,100 for violating his fundamental and human rights. Now the third one was that the federal government was directed to report back within 3 months on steps taken to comply with the ruling. Till date, this particular issue happened around 2022-2023. Till date, as a matter of fact, the federal government has not even replied or probably responded to them or probably complied with the orders that this particular ECOWAS court actually gave. Like I said, you don't need to support anybody, but it is a very dangerous precedent when a country refuses to follow or probably obey court orders. In fact, that is the height of lawlessness. That is the height of lawlessness when a country refuses to obey court order. That is why a lot of people are saying, are you sure that if after this back and forth with Justice James Omotosho at the Federal High Court, and if he orders Kanu's release, are you sure the federal government will equally comply or probably obey court orders on this particular regard or probably on this particular matter? That is a fear of a lot of people, that if the federal government would actually obey these particular court orders. So you could see how both the UN and the ECOWAS court gave their rulings and their judgments and everything, and even their orders till date. The federal government refused, as a matter of fact, to obey these particular court orders. Well, like I said, Nnamdi Kanu's next case will be on the 13th of this particular month, in few days time.
Ndị be anyị ngwadalụ ole nenu dịka unu si wee na-esola n'iru akwụkwọ n'ihe nke anyị na-eme na Eastern News 24. Ka efi were ikwu gbasịta maka ya bụ ife ndị a niile nọ n'iru akwụkwọ n'ụbọchị uhuruchi nke taa. Ka efi wee ikwu gbasịta maka ya bụ ife drọpụrụ ife iche n'ụdị nke gị ngwa nke mesịa na ụmụnne m.